book lovers, it is G-Swizz here, and I'm here today to talk about some of my favorite sequels. If you didn't know, this is a 7 on Sunday topic, and I am the host of 7 on Sunday. I will link the Goodreads page down in the description where you can check it out and you can participate in a topic in the future, or you can suggest a topic. And this week's topic I've wanted to do for a while. We've talked about finales previously. We've talked about ones that we've loved and we didn't love, but we haven't necessarily talked about sequels yet. I'm not gonna lie, I'm a huge fan of sequels, considering that I rarely read standalones. It's actually very weird because this year I'm reading a lot more standalones. You know, I'm just diversifying my reading challenge this year. Nothing bad about that. But sometimes there are some sequels in series that absolutely blow us away, that end up being a step up from the previous book or end up elevating the series. Maybe the sequel is the strongest book in the series rather than the finale. I mean, obviously in those cases we're not talking about duologies, but you know, sequels and duologies can also be included in this as well. I'm very much looking forward to discussing the books that I preferred over the first books or over certain other books in the series as I go along this list today. So I guess without further ado, I'm gonna get straight into my favorite sequels. So first of all, I want to talk about A Gathering of Shadows by Victoria Schwab. Now, it's actually very funny because a lot of people usually get invested in this series either by the second book or by the third book. The third book, a lot of the time, is the turning point for people, but for me, the turning point was A Gathering of Shadows. I actually almost DNF'd this series after reading the first book, and I'm so happy that I didn't, because A Gathering of Shadows ended up blowing me away. We're introduced to my favorite character of the series, and that's Alucard Emery. It has been years, like probably around 5 years since I've read the series, and I still think of these characters absolutely fondly after the second book. Even though it was a little bit slower, there was a little bit of a slower pace in this book, I just loved how we had so many great character moments. And I'm not gonna lie, I think my first reading experience of the series was deeply affected by the fact that I was listening to the audiobooks. The first audiobook is narrated by a completely different narrator. However, the second and the third audiobooks, I don't know if they're narrated by a full cast or if they're just multiple narrators, but that really did elevate the story. And I personally really loved the series from book 2, and I considered it a favorite series from book 2. Personally, I find this to be a strong sequel. However, a lot of people believe that A Conjuring of Light was the strongest book in the series. For some reason, this book will always be my favorite. And the next sequel I want to bring up is The Wicked King by Holly Black. Now, it's understandable why not everyone finds the sequel to be strong. In fact, it's not actually a very popular opinion to find the rest of the series strong after the first book. However, I feel like The Wicked King gave me a lot more context as to what was happening, specifically in Jude and Cardan's situation, because there's such a back and forth there, and there's a lot that's not said between them. I understand a lot of people's frustration when they're reading the first book. They're just not understanding the tension between them two, or like whether they actually like each other or not. I think The Wicked King sheds a bit more light on that. However, it does still leave you with questions, but it's the kind of book that makes you want to keep reading. While I wouldn't say that it is a really strong sequel, I really did like the direction of the story from this book, and it made me realize how invested I was in the series, but also it kind of helped me better understand both Jude and Cardan's characters individually and together. Now I'm back at it again with an unpopular opinion. I believe that The Crown of Gilded Bones by Jennifer L. Armentrout is a strong sequel. I really loved this part of the story, and I know a lot of people who love the series would say that A Kingdom of Flesh and Fire is probably the strongest sequel. I have to disagree, and the reason why I have to disagree is nothing to do with like the romantic plotline. It's just we're spending too much time doing nothing in that book. Of course, I like how some things end up getting resolved by the end of the book. It's like kind of a therapy session, but I like this book because it's a little bit more plot driven, and we're finally at a point in the story where the protagonist feels like they can be at home, essentially. I like that about the story personally, and I just love seeing my characters happy. I know things don't go well in the next book. I'm not talking about the next book here. If I could just take this book alone, if I could just read this book alone and not think about book 4, that would be great. I loved book 3 in this series, and I know it's a very unpopular opinion. Not everybody likes this part of the series, but I do, and it really helped me have more motivation to continue on with this series. And another strong sequel that really highly encouraged me to continue on with a series that I wasn't too sure about and kind of solidified that the series was going to be one of my favorite series of all time is Kingsbane, which is the second book in the Imperium trilogy by Claire Legrand. This book, oh my goodness, it single-handedly just shifted everything for me. I actually ended up reading this during the last term topple that I participated in, and that was the best choice ever, because this book really motivated me to just continue going, continue soldiering on. However, I did not have Lightbringer straight away. And when I think about it, I'm kind of happy that I didn't have Lightbringer straight away, because I reckon that Lightbringer might have disappointed me if I read it straight away, because Kingsbane, in my personal opinion, was absolutely phenomenal. I loved every part of this book, and I just loved how the two plot lines, the two stories finally intersected. They finally intertwined. It happened in the best ways that I could possibly imagine it happening. I reckon that this book was such a good payoff to anybody who read the first book in the series and was wondering the whole time, what is going on? I feel like this book was the payoff, and I will forever kind of compare the series to the Netflix series Dark. It really reminds me of the Netflix series Dark, just set in a high fantasy world. This sequel has everything I wanted in it and absolutely more. I loved Kingsbane, and it definitely solidifies that the Imperium trilogy is one of my favorite series of all time. And the next sequel I want to bring up on this list is the second book in the Air Awakens Chronicles, which is Firefalling. I don't necessarily talk about the sequels in this series that much, but let me just tell you that Firefalling really shifted everything for me. It changed the game for me. Sad things do happen in the series, but I love this book in particular because things happen, and things that I wanted to happen happened. And yes, you know, as you continue on with the series, things just get more heartbreaking, and the romantic tension just becomes angstier and harder to bear. But let me just say that the payoff for the series is all the better for it. I just love the Air Awakens Chronicles. The sequels just keep on getting stronger. Sometimes they do have their slower moments, but it's all worth it in the end. I just love the series, and I love how strong the characters get with each book. Let me bring up another unpopular opinion. This is probably one of my favorite sequels of all time, and I understand why people don't like it, but hear me out, okay? I really love Insurgent, and this is my favorite book in the Divergent series, and no one can change my mind. I love this book so much because, as I've been talking about when it comes to Divergent, Triss's journey throughout the story resonates with me personally. Honestly, I've talked about this sometime before on my channel, but Insurgent, I really felt like it really saved my life at a very mentally low stage that I was going through. And literally one of my biggest honors in life was to meet Veronica Roth and to tell her that this book kind of saved my life. That was a moment in my life I will never forget. But you know what else is a moment in my life I will never forget? The time when I read these chapters for the very first time. Like, I remember the places that I visited while taking this book around. I remember the Victoria's Secret perfume that I was wearing and the scent of it. Unfortunately, they've discontinued it. It's not okay. But being that they've discontinued it, it makes me nostalgic of the time that I read Divergent. And so then from now on, I will only really be able to associate that scent with this time in my life, actually reading the series for the very first time. I know, I remember everything to that specific detail. Every single time I reread the series, I always stop at the end of Insurgent, and the reason why I always stop at the end of Insurgent is because Allegiant I haven't been able to read more than once. It has been difficult for me to reread that book considering what happens, and eventually I might do it again. But what I do know is that every single time I feel like I'm facing hardship, I always go back to Insurgent because I see what Triss is going through, and it just makes me feel like I'm not alone. Understandably, Triss is going through PTSD, and she's going through hardship, and she's struggling with grief in the second book. And I understand why a lot of people don't like the recklessness that comes with that, and her having to go through her development journey, through having to be so reckless to all of a sudden, through realizing that selflessness is also actually being there for people and yourself. I understand why that development journey is so hard for people. However, this book, in terms of character development, is one of the strongest sequels I've ever read, and honestly, I didn't really care about the plot at the end of the day, even though I actually really did because I really like the series. Honestly, Triss's character development journey for me, personally, is what makes this book one of the strongest sequels I've ever read. Now we're gonna talk about a popular opinion. I think that a lot more people resonate with Feyre's development journey in A Court of Mist and Fury. It's actually very funny and ironic because I have talked to Camilo about how he feels about the series, and he actually likes the first book better, which is very interesting. I reckon that if anything, I don't want to compare the series to Divergent, but hear me out. It kind of reminds me of how I justify Insurgent in the first place, because Insurgent is a character development journey for Triss, and if you're not necessarily connected to Triss, if you don't necessarily resonate with Triss or like Triss, you're not gonna like Insurgent. How does this parallel to A Court of Mist and Fury? If you're not invested in Feyre's journey, if you're not invested in her development, as much as you are with the plot, I hate to say it, but that's probably why you don't like the second book book that much. That is how I can see why Camilo prefers the first book over the second book, even though he loves the plot twist at the end of the second book. It's just all these 600 pages. It was very much difficult for him to actually read through and to go through and everything, because it was a character development journey for Feyre, for Rhysand, as well for the rest of the characters to be introduced to a new ensemble of characters, especially when you thought that the original ensemble were going to be the characters you were going to be following throughout the rest of the series. My conclusion for this book is that it is a strong sequel in the same way that I find Insurgent to be a strong sequel for the series, because it serves as a very good development arc for these characters in this book, and it's a very strong introduction to the rest of the world in the series. The second last sequel I'm gonna bring up is a sequel that I devoured last week. It was so difficult for me to put down, and no, I don't like how the sequel ends. However, it is a very great continuation of the Prison Healer world. Yes, I'm gonna talk about the Gilded Cage. This book took the series to a whole nother level, because the entire Prison Healer plot, you're literally spending that time within the prison itself. What I love about this book is that it takes place on the outside world, and you get to learn more about the outside world. And also, now that you know who the characters are, the book becomes a lot more interesting, because a lot of the time you're questioning everyone's motives, and you're also questioning what's gonna happen next, or like how are certain characters going to be reacting to certain situations, or maybe potentially betrayals. If the Prison Healer was very slow for you and you just weren't necessarily invested in the plot because you were in the same place like the entire book, trust me, the Gilded Cage really does step it up a notch when it comes to the setting and everything, and just like getting to know the systems and all that stuff. It's just good. I'm trying not to spoil it, because honestly, like, I could spoil it in 1 second and then all of a sudden I've just ruined the entire series for you. Like, that is how serious all the secrets within the series are. The sequel is absolutely incredible, and yes, oh yes, the cliffhanger is unbearable. And honestly, I am regretting not delaying my reread for this series. And the final sequel that I want to bring up on this list is one of the only 5-star reads I've had for the year of 2022. And that, my friends, is Court by Tracy Wolff. I absolutely love this book in the series. Oh my goodness. Now, if you read the prior books in the series, you probably have concluded that this series is a very slow-going series. However, Court delivers on all fronts. It delivers in a way that you thought that Covet or Crush would deliver. I honestly feel like everybody at least needs to give Court a try if they powered through Covet and they wanted to either DNF or just finish the series there. Honestly, power through Court. I wouldn't even say power through Court. Court is such an easy sequel to read, and it's a very easy sequel to read because everything has been set up and established. Like, all the foundation is there from the previous books. Everything is there for you to just have an action-packed and a great time, and a time full of revelations to give you so many different theories about what's going to happen next in this series and in this world in general, because there's going to be a spin-off. I'm so excited for the spin-off, and the cliffhanger was wild. However, I really felt like this book gave me a lot more answers than questions, which is very interesting for a book that isn't even the finale. This book actually answers a lot more for the reader than you would actually anticipate based on the previous books in the series. Trust me, it is so good, and I'm so happy that the foundation was laid in the previous book, and that Tracy took that foundation seriously and did not waffle us around, did not put us on bridge to slow place to slow place. No, Tracy took it seriously this book. I feel like the sequel is so much better for that. Thank you, Tracy. So I guess that's gonna be it for this video today, book lovers. If you happen to stay till the end of the video, leave me the clap emoji, because it takes 2 hands to clap. Ha! Call that a sequel. That was such a bad joke. Oh my goodness, I'm done. If you happen to enjoy this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet already. Join the amazing community of book lovers. And also, I have social medias. I'm at GSwizzleBooks on Twitter and Instagram, and I'm also at Goodreads. That's www.goodreads.com/GSwizzle. And finally, I'm at TikTok. I'm at GSwizzle on TikTok if you want to follow me there for some bookish content. I love you, book lovers, and I will see you later. Peace.
How did I win half when I flipped it in a double? Started out with half and I flipped it in a double.